what we did was we brought users in. It was a usability test, 5 people, not a giant study. And I just gave them a can of soda and said, hey, can you use this app to identify what can of soda you're drinking? And I watched people use it. And it was really interesting because what people had been doing is just like spinning this can of soda around and around and around and trying to, moving the phone in and out and just this kind of wild gesticulation, trying to get this thing to pick up, getting no signal back. And so the team decided to add a series of beeps. And once any of the barcode was in the view of the camera, it would start to beep, and it would beep faster as it got more of the barcode. And so they could make these micro adjustments to make sure all the barcode was in, and then they could get the information. And I just remember, like, after we made that release, one of the feedbacks we got via Twitter was this person who said that, like, today, for the first time in my life, I was able to go to the grocery store and get everything on my list because of this Seeing AI app. That was just, that kind of stuff is so powerful. And I know we're coming back to storytelling here. That's like a story in one sentence.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Uncut Design podcast, where I speak with design leaders at Microsoft who are shaping the future of user experiences. In this series, we'll explore their unique approaches, lessons learned, and insights on driving impactful design in an ever-evolving industry. Today, my guests are Samantha Neufeld and Anuja Singhal. Samantha is a senior user researcher at Microsoft, where she works in the Gen AI business applications team. Anuja Singhal is a senior designer at Microsoft on the Power Platform team, specializing in narratives and strategy. In our conversation, we talk about storytelling and its power to shape products, how to craft compelling narratives, strategies for being an impactful storyteller, and so much more. I was very lucky to connect with Samantha and Anuja during my internship at Microsoft, and I'm so excited to have them both featured on this podcast, as they are well known across many teams for their ability to create narratives that resonate on a human level. With that, I bring you Samantha Neufeld and Anuja Singhal.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you taking the time to meet today. I know you guys are probably super busy, but yeah, this means a lot.
Thanks for thinking of us. I'm glad that this worked out.
Yeah, no, you're definitely one of the episodes that a lot of people said to reach out to you guys. So I think this is definitely going to be something special here from your experiences. Yeah, I'm excited.
And it's unedited, so hey, no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
And if it goes really terribly, then we just record it again next week.
Yeah, there's always that option. Awesome. Well, I think to start, could you guys give a little bit of background, kind of introduction into how you got into design, I guess, Samantha, for your research, and how that kind of led to you being at Microsoft?
Sam, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So I didn't know that UX research was a field at all, or that UX was a field at all. And I was getting my PhD in social psychology at Arizona State University, studying emotion and specifically studying guilt. So it was really like interesting research, really kind of more fun than it sounds. But I wasn't sure if academia was for me or not. And so in the meantime, my boyfriend at the time, he's now my husband, had started a startup company called People Power that was focused on, it was a consumer IoT company that was focused on helping people save energy in their homes. And they were having a good time with the technology, like the technology was working well, but they were having a lot of trouble with the behavior change piece of it and motivating people through the app or through the displays to actually make the behavior changes they need to save energy. So they rattled around a few ideas, and one thing they came up with was like, oh, we should make people feel guilty about using too much energy. And we know somebody who studies guilt. So they reached out to me and asked for my help with behavioral change and some of the messaging. So on the side, I started working with them and doing the things that were really common back then, doing the Facebook A/B testing. This was about 13 years ago. And it was fun. It felt impactful. It felt more rewarding to me, I guess, than academia did at the time. So as time went on, they had more questions around like, why aren't people using this feature? Why, how can we help people set this up, like create a good out-of-box experience, that sort of stuff. So I started doing research on that and didn't really still know it was a UX research career, but I liked what I was doing. So by the time I was ready to go on the job market, I had met people in UX and knew that the UX research was kind of what I was doing. And so I applied at that time to UX research positions, including Microsoft, and started at Bing. And that was about 11 years ago.
Wow.
Awesome. I love that.
Sounds
All
like
backwards.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I think like I've just had a really I've worked across. I started off as a graphic designer in advertising back in India, and then I did a lot of that. I did my master's in design studies, and that time we were not really talking about UX design per se. It was more of like industrial design or service design or things like that, which were more to do with how organizational processes and things like that. So, but then my master's was, it really kind of changed my perspective towards approaching design and storytelling. Like I initially in advertising as a graphic designer and art director, we were always like all about the client, right? Like the client wants this, so this is what we do. But I think after doing my master's program, I kind of changed that lens to becoming more user centered. Like, who is really going to be consuming this project or work, or like who's the real audience to the work that I'm doing? And I think then after that, I continued in art direction and advertising. I went into product design, UX design. I even, in New York, I was in marketing. So I was at one time, I was the one-man army running an entire marketing department for an organization. So I was doing press releases, and I was doing social media activation, and I was doing like all sorts of whatever marketing, and managing marketing budget, which was crazy to think of. But like, I think along the way, I picked up all of these different skills, right? That is, is not just design, but was the skill, writing, video. It just was not anymore about design, but it was more about communication. It was more about effective communication, effective storytelling. And I think that really, when I came to interview at Microsoft, I never, by the way, thought that I'll ever get into tech because of my background. But when I came to Microsoft, especially for this position, it was an interesting position because it asked, the description just had, oh, you need to be creating prototypes and wireframes, and you need to be able to create decks and everything. And I was like, wow, this is like, this is exactly like as if it's written for me, because I can do all of that. But anyway, long story short, I think for me, Microsoft was also a huge opportunity because personally, for me, I always thought that I want to create work, whatever form it is. I want to create work that can actually have a real life impact on people's lives. And I think that aligned amazingly with Microsoft's vision and value and mission and culture. So I think it's just a long journey down to Microsoft. And I do think that this is a great place to be doing this kind of work now.
That's amazing. I love to hear how, even both of you, leveraged kind of your unique strengths and lived experiences, even like through post-grad and afterwards, which is, it's just so nice to hear. So I'm super curious I want to know, like, how did you guys make yourself stand out in such a competitive field?
I can go. Yeah. I think so right from the very beginning, I was always known to be a systems thinker. I was always like a big picture thinker. Like, there are the two kinds of designers or two kinds of creatives, the ones who are beautiful, just immaculate at their craft, and then those that can think big picture and do more of like let's stand back and look at the bigger vision. So for me, I was the latter. I was never like known for my craft, and that's not to say that I wasn't good at what I did, but it was just a way to, to communicate. It wasn't so much. I enjoyed the big picture thinking more, and I was known for that. And then I also, because as I mentioned, because of the illustrative, crazy up and down and lots of skill picking on the way kind of a career that I've had, I think I just ended up becoming this T-shaped designer where, it's almost like a hybrid unicorn, kind of like whatever you want to call it, but it's just T-shaped in the sense that yes, my language is visual design, but I can do several other things, which is an important thing to call out, because I think, a lot of us, especially early in career, we kind of go very, oh, I'm going to be a visual designer, I'm going to be a researcher, I'm going to be this. For me, it was always very like, I can be anything as long as it requires me to communicate to a certain kind of audience. So I think that was a different way to stand out, I guess. And the other thing which I've developed over a period of time is like bias to action. I am a designer that doesn't get stuck in details. I'm more of like, hey, let's get this going, and let's try to solve this problem. So I think that these are a few things which I think people appreciate about working with me, which I think also makes you stand out as a candidate.
Yeah, and that last one I think is super important. Just being able to take action and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I can see why that's so appealing to people. And for me, this was a long time ago, so I don't think the market was as competitive as it is now. But during my portfolio presentation, so when I interviewed at Bing, I presented a portfolio of work, which is really common for design and research. And I tried to showcase a variety of different studies. So I'd worked with in academia. I showed some of my research thinking there, which tends to be like these rigorous kind of long-term, very involved, very detail-oriented studies. And then some of my work with the startup, which was a lot faster paced, a lot quicker turnaround. So kind of what you're saying, Anuja, too, similarly, was what I was trying to do was showcase like a variety of methods and an ability to work within constraints of like budget and timing, which is more of an issue on the startup side. And I think that was good timing, because what Bing was looking for at the time where they were moving towards like being even more agile. They were looking for people who could be pretty flexible, turn things around quickly, who didn't get hung up on like making a perfect study, but who could collect some information and help the team move forward in some direction. So there's always like a balance in research of wanting to make sure that you're collecting good data and being rigorous and being really thoughtful about the research you do, but also having to do it, get the team the findings in a timely way, and working within the constraints that you wouldn't think we'd have at Microsoft, budget stuff and like what kind of tools, but we do. So yeah, just being able to balance all of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's something that's definitely highly valued here. And really with any big corporation is being able to take a step back and really see how does this align to everything and what's the big picture. That's amazing to hear. I'm curious, like what's something that's, let me rephrase that. What's something about design or I guess UX that's clear to you, but you don't think is quite as clear to others?
Sam, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only person who's realized this, but when a lot of people think about user research, they think about the person who implements the research process. They're they're like advocating for the user. That's their role on the team. They're working with the product team to identify the most important questions. They're planning and running studies. They're analyzing results, and they're communicating the findings to the team. I have found that I can have a lot more impact if my role doesn't really end there. So I'll give an example. The last team I was on for 10 months. It was an innovation or moonshot team, we called it. And we were given at the outset, of course, it took longer this time, we were given 100 days to go from like nothing to a product. So as you can imagine, like research was very heavy on the front end, trying to figure out what are we going to build. Then once we had an idea of what we were going to make, everyone's off and running, and there wasn't as much time for people to, sit with me and think about what are the studies we're going to run, what do we need to know next, because we had to move really quickly. So I was doing research, but my findings weren't always getting implemented into the product or brought in, and I understood why, because it's just timing. So it was really only once I started working more closely with the other disciplines that I could really be sure the insights we collected were making their way into product. So I started working with the PMs really closely. I was working on like feature specs with them. I was working on use cases and creating scripts for demos and all that stuff. I was working with the designers on journey maps and Figma files. I was working with engineering, which we as researchers don't do quite as much, but like a lot of bug bashes, logging bugs in ADO, helping prioritize bugs, all these things that I felt I had to do to have actual impact on the team, because research can kind of be a step removed sometimes. So that was my way of making sure the insights were making their way into product planning and development. And it's an expanded scope beyond what I think a lot of people think of when they think of like what is UX research, just making sure that there's a lot of like really tight collaboration with the other disciplines.
Yeah, I love that, Sam. Like, and that actually is a great adding to that, I think it's so much about we live in a time, and where role boundaries are not, almost like they're very fuzzy. It feels like we live in such a collaborative culture inside of Microsoft that and it's important for us to be that way. I think this kind of reminds me of something that I recently read about Conway's Law. I don't know if you guys probably know about that already, but something that other brand team and marketing within Microsoft, they refer to it, because Satya, I think, apparently referred to that as well, that Conway's Law is basically where a company's product, in really dumbed down terms, it's basically a company's product is a reflection of its culture. And I think that's really interesting, because we're living in we have this push to create products that are that focus on end-to-end customer journeys rather than creating siloed product offerings. So this is a time when you're really doing a lot of cross collaboration with other teams and stuff like that. So it's really, and that reflects in the product that you end up creating, right? Which is very customer focused. It's customer centered, right? So I think to your point, design as a function is, it's now much broader than just being a researcher or a designer or a writer or whatever. Like, I think it's just more broader. And I think the one other thing that I think is more clear to me, and of course, I'm sure it's like general knowledge too, but I think designers and storytellers are trained to be empathetic, but like we cannot work without empathy. There needs to be, we have the superpower that, and a lot of us don't, we need to realize that superpower is truly something that is required in the day and age that we are, that we are in right now, where we're building user-centered products and processes, and empathy is like at the core of all of that. And to me, what is clear is that design needs to have that seat at the table. Design and storytelling needs to be, if we are building products that need to be user-centered, design, research, storytelling, this is stuff like that needs to be at the table, because empathy is the need of the hour, and that's what we bring to the table. So yeah, that's what I want to add.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think we just got to let that sit and marinate for a little bit. I should get that framed. A company's product is a reflection of its culture. I just love that phrase.
Empathy.
Empathy. That's what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And to your point, Samantha, I think, just not working in a silo at all and having, as much collaboration, because, within the UX kind of sector, like we are the user advocate, and kind of bringing that to as much, cross-functional teams as we can. It's really important. So I love hearing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious, how do you ensure that both user needs and business goals are met in your design process?
Sam.
Oh, yeah, I'll throw another one in there, since we got like a triad going at user needs, business goals, and technology, the limitations of the technology and what's happening on the dev side. So yes, our role is to advocate for the user. We can't just be that, because we can't be impactful if we don't understand the other pieces of the product. I made this mistake many times, I'm sure, early in my career, where I ran a study, I found some pain points or some problems, made some recommendations that were either technically unfeasible or didn't align with the business strategy. I said, we should do this. And then, nobody did it because it didn't make any sense. Problem didn't get fixed, like, at least in the way that I thought it should. Research wasn't impactful in that way. And so I work hard now to make sure that I'm at the meetings or reading the docs where our strategy's laid out. To the earlier point, I'm trying to collaborate with all of the disciplines to understand like where we really are as a product. And I'm a manager. I didn't mention this, but I'm managing a team of researchers. So I try to help my team understand the strategy as well. And this helps research in a few ways. The first is that we can prioritize better. So if we really understand what are the business goals, then because we always have more research to do than we have bandwidth for, it helps us prioritize what are those studies we're going to run and what are the questions we need to answer most importantly. Then the second is when it comes to actually running a study, what are the research questions we want to focus on? Like, how do you frame the study? You've got 5 developers coming in for interviews, and you want to get feedback on this piece of the product. But like specifically, what kind of feedback do you want? Do you want to understand how to increase usage? Do you want to understand where are opportunities to like streamline with AI? There's a bunch of different ways you can frame the study, and knowing your business strategy really helps you nail that down. And then lastly, of course, when you're presenting the findings, you're talking to an audience of people who are not researchers, and they're the people who are most familiar with the strategy and the technical constraints. And so when you're able to present your findings and say, this is where we had trouble, based on what I actually understand of the strategy and the technology, like here's an idea, or let's discuss it and talk about it here, or whatever it is you want to say, then it just resonates better with the audience.
Yeah. And I think and that kind of like also the collaboration piece, like it's so important, because that's where you kind of get to learn, like you have access to all of this business goals and business strategy information as a team member, no matter where you sit on the spectrum, right? So like what I like in my job, I am a narratives designer on the team. So what that means is that about 60% of my job, I would say, is about like shaping and communicating product strategy, both internally and externally, in collaboration with product leadership. So like, of course, like the leadership is coming together and they're creating the strategy based on, signals that they're receiving from everywhere. So I help communicate that, I help build that content, right? And the rest of the 40% of my job is essentially joining dots. I work very closely with not just, of course, product leadership or working on the strategy piece, but also I work very closely with people in design and PMs and engineering, marketing, and even admin. Like I work with everybody at some point, just kind of bridging that that gap, like, hey, this is what we're building for the business strategy content, can be, and if I, I'm in those meetings, I try to see where everybody is thinking is. So I try to, like, if I see that, I mean, most of the time in our team, especially, I feel like we have those open channels of communication. So mostly everybody seems to be talking the same language, but like, we also build initiatives like customer promises and things like that actually help align the team on common vocabulary and common what is it that we're trying to achieve, like what are the promises that we're making to our customers in terms of delivering a product that they will love. So that I would say that my everyday job, if anything, is that it's about finding that balance between user needs and business goals.
Sounds like I should be going to you to understand the strategy better.
I can definitely, but we do, like Sam and I work a lot together, on stuff like this, and that's the fun part of it. We just we're always bouncing ideas off each other, so that's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's amazing to hear. Yeah, I think that's it's what makes the job interesting at the end of the day and exciting is collaborating across with different teams, different people. And I think it's super important because especially with tight deadlines, I think especially amidst this kind of like AI boom we're in, it can feel like there's a lot of emphasis on just, pumping out that work and, getting it handed off. So it's very refreshing to hear. But yeah, kind of to that point, I wanted to ask, like, how does designing for AI experiences differ from traditional UX design?
Should I go first? Okay. Yeah. I think, I think it kind of brings me back to the empathy piece. Like, I kind of want to keep going back to that only because it's so important. And more so now with like AI in the picture, it can get pretty tricky. Like, a new technology usually warrants like lack of trust from our customers. And so how do we essentially design a product that centers around a technology that is known to make people uncomfortable, right? Like, it's really interesting. So designing, I guess, like AI native user experiences, it requires designers and PMs and everybody engineering to truly know what that human AI boundaries are. And then, factoring in additional guardrails like transparency and trust and AI reasoning, and thought process and, teaching opportunities for error handling. And ultimately considering that, a human AI relationship is actually long term. It's not like a short term fix or a user experience, which is typically, I just come and do something with my product and I go out. It's long term. It's a relationship building situation. And I think to be aware of the implications of the work that we are doing, I think it's really, really important. And also always thinking that how can we always keep the human in the loop? I think like that's really that's really key to be able to build these AI experiences.
Yeah, I think human in the loop is a huge one. When it comes to conducting research on AI experiences, there are like a few big things that I keep in mind, and it's always evolving. But one really interesting one, and I'm talking here specifically about like the large language models or generative AI, because AI has been around for a long time, of course. But I think what we're seeing a lot of is a lot of like generative AI. So one big one is just the non-deterministic nature of it, which means that the output can vary each time, even when users give it the same input. And so like what they expect to happen is not always going to happen. This is different from the traditional systems that we've looked at for a long time, where users can kind of expect the same thing if they do the same thing. So for traditional systems, it's a lot easier to test certain parts of the experience, because you can, like with prototypes and wireframes and that sort of stuff, like very early stage designs, because as the researcher, you can show the user pretty much exactly what's going to happen. And with non-deterministic experiences, where the output's going to be different every time, it's really hard to know how well it will actually work in the user's day-to-day. So in other words, part of their experience, part of the user experience is unpredictable. And that makes it hard to test unless you're really like giving them a working model, a working version of it. So that's one challenge, is that you really don't know how well some of these are going to work until you can give people like a live model to work with. And then understand like what's the quality of the output, how accurate is it, how complete is it, how much value does it bring. So that's just a big pragmatic challenge. More philosophically, I think, which is some of what Anuja was getting to, there are a lot of questions around trust. How do you build trust over time between the user and an AI system? And how do you measure that? Like from the UX side, UX research, we think a lot about how to assess things and metrics. So how do we measure these things and understand what builds trust? How can we make sure that trust is growing over time and that people don't, that the AI doesn't do something that will lose people's trust? And along maybe similar lines is just this issue of AI being much more prone to being anthropomorphized by users. And so people will think of it as another person, another colleague, even though they know it's not, but just because of the way it behaves, it drives some of that. So how do we think about like personalities if we want to go that route? How do we think about like voice, and how do we think about how it's going to appear and when it should loop the human in, like Anuja was saying? So a lot of really interesting, more like philosophical questions there.
Oh, I love that. There's so much great points brought up, and yeah, I think the anthropomorphic kind of aspect of it is huge. I think it's under the hood. Like if you kind of like analyze just how these models are working, it's just math kind of equations at the end of the day. But yeah, it feels so real and so engaging.
So intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. That's great. So I guess, how do you guys define the difference between either generalist and a specialist in design or UX? And where do you see yourself on that spectrum?
So I don't think about it a whole lot, to be honest. I think the framework Anuja talked about earlier, like the T-shaped model, is probably where a lot of us are. We know a lot of different methods. I think all of us have methods we haven't tried and would like to try. I know there's several that I have heard of that sound really fun that I've never done. So, but we all have this toolbox of like research methods and frameworks, and we all probably have like a few favorites that we go deep in. It might be like methods. It might be types of research, like qualitative versus quantitative research. Some researchers are very strong quant researchers. Some don't do a lot of quant. They are really into like qualitative, like ethnographic research, that kind of stuff. So for me, I do consider myself like a mixed method researcher. I have really good quant training from my grad school days, but to be honest, I don't use it a lot, and I don't love the deep quant. I like being able to analyze surveys and that sort of stuff, but I don't do a lot of like cluster analyses and really sophisticated analyses that some of my quant research friends do. But I can do some of that lighter stuff. I also really love interviewing people. That's probably my favorite method. So I consider myself a generalist with a few favorites.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, a generalist is someone who kind of has, or like who's able to have that 360 view of solving a problem. And whereas a specialist, in my opinion, is someone who is, who comes in as an expert for a specific aspect of that bigger problem or that bigger solution that we're thinking of. So in like design terms, or like from my art direction days, I want to say that, for example, like I would imagine an art director or a creative director to be a generalist, and someone like an illustrator or a typographer or like a 3D artist to be a specialist who comes in to actually make a vision kind of true, like, real. So I'm not saying that one or the other is better, but I think it's just everybody has their own areas that they are better at. Like some people are really good at going deep, and that's amazing because we need that. And then there are some who have a big picture thinking, and I have said this earlier in our conversation, that I would imagine myself to be in the latter, the generalist segment, I guess.
That's awesome. I guess just to piggyback off that question, do you think it's important for designers or researchers who are early in their career to identify like their specialization pretty early?
I mean, I don't think so at all, to be honest. I feel like early in career especially should be all about trying new things and doing things that you haven't tried before, and getting comfortable, like, hey, I'm a generalist, or hey, I'm a specialist. I don't think it kind of closes doors on like opportunities to learn, which I think is not ideal early in career. However, I also do think that some people, it is a bit subjective. As I mentioned, some people feel very passionate about a certain skill set, a certain area, and that's great, because if that's what they choose to do, then I think that's cool too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I struggle with this one too. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. We do think a lot about like, building your brand and being known for something. And so it is good to be able to differentiate yourself when there's a big pool of candidates, being able to say like, this is the person who's great at X. So I see the value in it. I also totally agree with Anuja that early on, you don't necessarily have the experiences to know what you're going to love and what you're going to be amazing at. So finding a way to differentiate yourself is important. I don't know if it has to be along the the type of design you do, but it's an interesting question. It probably really depends on the role. Like when I was on the job market, I interviewed at Microsoft and at Google, and the Google role was specifically for survey research. So they wanted somebody who was like a deep specialist in survey. The Microsoft role was just for more of a general UX research. So I think it kind of depends on what role you're applying for and what you're hoping to do with your career too.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to what Sam just said, that it's so important to be able to differentiate. I mentor some people off this platform, and I have early in career people, and I often like get this question that how do I apply for roles? How do I like make my portfolio stand out? And I think the one thing that I always advocate for is like, it's not so much about your skills, but it's about your story. I do think that everybody has a very unique story. Everybody has their own why. And I think that's what people should use to capitalize, like they should capitalize on that to differentiate themselves in the job market. Because I think like your skills don't make you, it's your experiences that make you. So I feel like your story is unique. Every person's story is unique. So I feel like that's a really great way to be able to differentiate yourself. It doesn't have to be skills, because we live in a world where skills are just so transient, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Spoken like a storyteller. I love that. I think you're exactly right.
A lot of great points there. Yeah. Try new things and embrace those opportunities with open mind. A lot of value.
Yeah.
Samantha, you worked a lot with accessible design on projects like Seeing AI. Would you mind talking a little bit more about what Seeing AI is and how you approached creating an exclusive experience or inclusive?
Yeah. Seeing AI was I mean, it still is out there. It's still a product that Microsoft has been working on. It's amazing. It's a small team, but it is an app that was designed for the blind and low vision community that, you know, turns the visual world into an auditory experience, if that makes sense. So it started as a hackathon project. It won the Microsoft whole hackathon, and because I knew the person who had run the team, I volunteered myself on the side to do research with them because I just loved the idea so much. Um, you know, it's really a challenge and an interesting one to do research where you are not the kind of user who would be using it. And so obviously it was important that we test with users who were blind or low vision so that, you know, we could get their real feedback on it. And even recruiting for that was kind of challenging at the time. I think we have a lot better ways to do that now. But one of the issues that came up was that people couldn't use the barcode scanner on it. We had a number of channels, like you could look at like writing. It would read writing. It would read handwriting. It would tell you if lights were on and off. It would describe a scene. It would pull up information about a product if you could scan the barcode, that sort of stuff. And one of the things the team noticed was that the barcode scanning feature wasn't being used very often. And that was a surprise because at the time, again, like 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of options for that. And we thought it would be a really important one just for like finding stuff in your pantry or going grocery shopping. So what we did was we brought users in. It was a usability test, 5 people, not a giant study. And I just gave them a can of soda and said, hey, can you use this app to identify what can of soda you're drinking? And I watched people use it. And it was really interesting because they would be holding the can of soda in one hand, holding the phone with the app in the other hand, trying to scan the barcode, but because they couldn't see, they didn't know when the barcode was in the view of the camera. Sometimes they were holding their finger over part of the barcode, and so it would never pick up. Sometimes they were holding the phone too close or too far away, and it wasn't picking up. And there were no cues in the app that would let them know how to fix it, how to make it work. So once we observed that, the team decided to just add some beeps to let people know when part of the barcode was found. Because what people had been doing is just like spinning this can of soda around and around and around and trying to, moving the phone in and out, and just this kind of wild gesticulation, trying to get this thing to pick up, getting no signal back. And so the team decided to add a series of beeps. And once any of the barcode was in the view of the camera, it would start to beep, and it would beep faster as it got more of the barcode. And so they could make these micro adjustments to make sure all the barcode was in, and then they could get the information. And I just remember, like, after we made that release, one of the feedbacks we got via Twitter was this person who said that, like, today, for the first time in my life, I was able to go to the grocery store and get everything on my list because of this Seeing AI app. That kind of stuff is so powerful. And I know we're coming back to storytelling here. That's like a story in one sentence, right? Like, this person, for the first time in their life, was able to go to the grocery store, get everything they needed without, having somebody help them. So that became something that really inspired the team, actually, and that's, I think, how we tried to think about it. Just like, how can we really bring value to people? How do we make things that are challenging in their life much easier?
Yeah,
That is so cool. I loved it. I love that. I love that story. That is so amazing. Sorry, what was the question again? I just got a little bit like lost there.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, it was just for me. It was Seeing AI specific.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just
awesome.
Such a powerful story. Yeah, from a complete 180, from frustration to delight, and I think completely informed by listening and observing users and really designing for them. Yeah, that's amazing. Anuja, I'm curious, like you mentioned as a liaison, you've been kind of like a liaison between both product leadership and different design teams. So I'm curious, how do you ensure that design narratives resonate with both technical and non-technical audiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I guess, like, the first thing that I end up asking before approaching any project is like, who is this for? Who is my audience? And it's typically either business decision makers or technical decision makers, rarely like the two of them together. However, I have done keynote presentations for like, a much larger audience, like where the audience is in the thousands, right? So that includes people from all techs, people from all tech fluencies. For example, like for Power Platform Conference, right? Like we do the communication, the keynote presentations for all of that. And where people come from all sorts of tech fluencies. So I think when we do stuff like that, I think we try to find a common thread that 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 resonates with both audience. So like when I gave that option, when I gave that example of the Power Platform Conference, that is a community of Power Platform users. They could be no code, low code, pro code, admins, all sorts of people all coming into this one conference. So what is that one thing that binds them all together is the feeling of community. So we try to build a narrative which on a fact that it on something that actually ties the community together. In this case, the Power Platform community. Other times, there are other binding factors such as like business value or the industry that they come from. So like, is it finance? Is it government? So like, what is that one industry? What are the struggles of that industry? And, things like that. So we have, and internally we do that with team values. So like, it's internally we are talking to engineers and designers and writers and creatives and all sorts of people. So like, again, we're talking to a large spectrum of people. So like, how do we talk to them? We talk to them with a language that they understand best, which is values. So I think it's always about finding that one thing that they all would resonate with. It doesn't have to be like too technical or too like, again, it's all about why should they care about this information rather than, what that information should be. Yeah.
I love that.
I just want to ask, how do each of you think about storytelling in your roles?
Do you want to go first, Anuja? It's
You go ahead. It's fine. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, so when I think of the role of user research, it's like two-pronged. We act as advocates for our users, and we also provide the product team with the information they need to make informed decisions on product strategy and development. So these typically go hand in hand because what's good for the user is good for the business. In order for us to do this, we collect research to gather the data and share it back with the team. And there are a lot of different ways to deliver our findings, but I think everyone understands that like you can create more powerful messaging if you can deliver it in like the form of a story. And I don't mean that in terms of like research has to write a novel or, put together a full end-to-end long story every time they tell something, but even just a sentence or something that really conveys how the user felt, I think it is really powerful. It seems like it's kind of hard because we're always looking at data, but actually like it's people who are at the center of our products. So when you think about the products that you love or that maybe products you have to use for work, but you just like want to bang your head against the wall when you're using them because they're so rough. Like our users have feelings when they use our products, and they're feeling delighted or frustrated or inspired or confused. If you can capture that, those feelings are really perfect for storytelling and conveying the crux of the user experience to the team. So I remember testing an enterprise product several years ago, and I was running a usability study. The participant was supposed to complete a task, but he was having so much trouble, and he was confused, and he was clicking on buttons and stuff that he expected to happen wasn't happening, and he wasn't getting any guidance from the system. And he just said, I feel like I was walking into a dark room. Like, am I even taking the right step? Setting this up, I've taken 5 steps. What if I took 5 steps into the wrong room? And I love that quote because that captures his feelings of confusion and disorientation. You never want your users to feel like they've walked into a dark room and they have no idea what they're doing or if they're in the right place, right? So the team ended up referring to this quote a lot, like, don't make users feel like they're walking into a dark room. And the point here is, when I think about like research storytelling, it does not have to be a big long story. It can be just some, like, a compelling sentence or two that really conveys how people feel and helps the team connect with them. I will say, though, that I have a colleague, Natasha Ivik, who has put a lot of thought into like really turning research into a story, and she has thought a lot about like the hero's journey. She's got a really great article on Medium, so if anybody wanted to check that out, I really enjoyed it. It's research and storytelling as well.
That's amazing. I'm definitely going to look that up, Sam. I think, like for me too, like so many things that Sam just said resonates with what I do as well. And even though we have storytelling and narratives in our title, over here, but I think, it's kind of hard. Like when you're talking to a certain kind of audience, it's really hard sometimes to bring up. There's usually we come up with things like, oh, we don't have time for, having that little bit of an arc and, kind of adding that emotional connect in the beginning of every single presentation that goes out. It's really hard to do that because sometimes most of our audience are like, just get to the point, like, what are we doing over here? So I think, for me, storytelling is, of course, like bringing in the emotion aspect and making people, ultimately, you're trying to inspire action, right? So like, and inspiring action can only happen if they feel emotionally connected to what they're seeing. And that can be done in a couple of different ways. And that's kind of where I try to bring in, it's about being able to make that connection with the audience, about understanding where they are, like what their struggles are in the beginning. So that could, in technical presentations and stuff that we do, that can be achieved by talking about the market landscape and the, like understanding, yeah, we get you, we get what you're dealing with at this point, and this is the situation, this is where we are at. Like AI is such an important opportunity to do storytelling because everybody is in that phase of like this unknown technology, what is it going to do to me? So it's a great opportunity. We're still trying to figure it out, like what's the best way to tell that story. But yeah, in short, storytelling to me is about making that connection with the audience and then telling it in a way that inspires action. That's pretty much what I would like sum it down. So like we're in the business of getting people inspired, influencing. Storytelling is about influencing. So I think that's kind of what we are trying to do with every piece that we create. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so valuable. I think definitely as designers, we often just tend to think about like the happy path. And I think that, for lack of better terms, like the ugly path isn't thought about as much. And just because there's like so much diversity of like expectations and how people really interact with a product. So those insights are definitely powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of you have experience crafting narratives for different contexts. I'm curious, how do you tailor your storytelling techniques when presenting to executives or leadership versus just stakeholders?
Yeah, I can go first. So I think as a rule of thumb, I would just say that when you're presenting to execs, we tend to always err towards the side of brevity because like we want to keep the message pretty high level. And but one thing that we do, whether it's execs or whether it's stakeholders, is always kind of understand what is the main goal of the session. Like, what are we really trying to achieve with this session? What do we want the audience to feel, do, think, after the session is done? Just kind of having all of this information sort of laid out before you even get started with building the content is usually like the first steps. And we also obviously want to know, like, what does the audience really care about? Like, what do they care about? So then, tailoring the content based on that. And usually with execs, it's kind of like, we kind of try to keep things high level because there's a lot to cover. Mostly, there's this, and then we try to keep the larger context in mind when we're talking to execs, because they are more in tune with company goals and market landscape and things like that. So we want our message to ladder up to all of these high level messages. So it's always get into the details where it makes sense, else lose it. Like, that's kind of a situation, like lose the detail where but then as long as you don't lose the essence of that detail, I think that's I think one of the main things about designers, and something that I've learned as a designer, is also like, coming up with a logo design is almost kind of like coming up with a story for an exec level or something like that. Or that elevator pitch, like how do you come up with, how do you grab somebody's attention in like 30 seconds or less? That's really what we are trying to achieve. If you're able to grab that attention in the first 30 seconds of your presentation, then I think, or I guess like first couple of slides of your presentation, then then got your audience engaged already. And with execs, it's usually just like keeping it to that company level and then kind of going deeper into how we ladder up to that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I don't have a lot to add to that. Excuse me, except to say that when I think about like presenting research to like the product team or other researchers versus LT, the audience matters a whole lot. And so when I do a study, for example, I'll present when I'm talking to the like product team, I'll go in a lot more into detail around like who we talked to and what were the specific findings, because they care about like logging bugs. They want all those details. They care about like what design tweaks are we going to make and that sort of stuff. When you talk to the LT, you just level that up, as Anuja was saying, and they don't necessarily care about all the smaller detail. They just want to know what were some of the like top 3 findings that you had and what direction is the team going to take the product based on this.
I think that's so huge, Ed. It's really all about like abstracting out the details and really highlighting what truly matters. I love that. How important is it for designers to actively build trust within their teams, and how does that influence the effectiveness of their storytelling?
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, trust is obviously like critical. You have to build it. You have to be credible. You have to kind of show your work. Sometimes you have to communicate really well so that the team understands and is in the loop and involved in the research that we're doing, so that when the results come out, they are not surprised by it. They had a chance to say, here are the questions. They had a chance to have their input. So building trust is really important. And when it comes to storytelling, I think one of the dangers of abstracting to a story or pulling like a single quote is that you never want to like cherry pick. You don't want to make it look like, oh, we interviewed 10 people, but here's like one quote that really I'm going to pull out. And, it shouldn't be biased, right? It should be a representative quote that is articulate, but is also represents the way a lot of people experience the product. So in that sense, it's really important to have like both the numbers and the story. And I'll give an example of that. Actually, this is a time when like the numbers didn't matter quite so much, but it was important to show them. So when I was working at People Power, which is that startup that I had talked about before that was doing energy conservation, they were trying to pivot. And so they pivoted. They had this really successful app called Presence that let users monitor things remotely. Did I talk about this already? Sorry, did I share any of this? Okay.
I believe so.
Think so. No.
So they it let people set up like a spare device to monitor things in their home remotely. And we knew that a lot of users were using it to keep an eye on their pets or their kids or whatever. But the team wanted to identify other opportunities for monitoring. And so we ran a survey just to see if there were any surprising or interesting ways that people were monitoring their homes. And so there were 532 respondents or so, pretty decent survey. Vast majority were using it for things like pets and homes and kids, which we already knew. But about 30 respondents, so about 6%, said they were using the Presence app to keep an eye on elderly relatives. And relatively speaking, it's not a really high number, but the verbatims that those people gave about like what the Presence app meant to them or how they used it were really by far the most compelling. So one woman said, I'm so grateful for Presence. I was able to keep my job because I didn't have to stay at home to make sure my elderly mother is okay, because I can keep an eye on her through the app. And so if you think about storytelling, like that sentence, again, is a whole story. It's a story about a person who's so worried about her mom that she almost gave up her job to stay home and be a caregiver. And you can imagine like the desperation that she felt, or the prospect of losing her job, how disappointing that might have been, or how scary that might have been. And then the relief that she gets from being able to keep her job and use this app and make sure her mom's okay. So it was only 30 responses, but they were, a number of them were like that, dramatic, if you will. And so the team actually saw that as a really interesting opportunity, and they fully pivoted the company toward age tech and AI caregiving, which is what they're still doing now. They even changed their name to Care Daily, and it's been very successful. And my husband quotes that woman all the time, even 10 years later, because it's a quote that everybody like resonates with. Everybody has elderly relatives. Everybody understands that this is a really troubling space. So the reason I tell that story is because you asked about building trust, and it was important to say, look, it's only 6% of the people, right? It's not like everyone is using this app for this. So you can build trust and credibility by saying, here are the numbers, but here is also what I think is really interesting and important about the qualitative verbatims and things that we pulled. And so now we have a whole story, a whole holistic idea, and the team can move forward with it as they want to. But it was the story of that woman that really set this pivot in motion.
Yeah, I love that story, Sam. I think like as far as like within team members, like building trust within team members, like I do think that I think it's more important than arguably more important than even like your design skills. I would say that having that soft skill of being able to reach out to people, because I think it starts with the understanding and with that humility that, hey, you don't know everything, right? So you kind of, and then you have a team of people who know, the collective, the power of the collective. I think it's kind of like that feeling of you. One thing which really drives me to work every day is like being surrounded by people who have amazing knowledge, right? And I can't even, like, I'm just 1% of that knowledge base, right? So I feel like it kind of goes back to, I feel like something that I mentioned earlier in our conversation is that Conway's law. Like I do feel that it's the power of the collective. It's about how you collaborate amongst teams and amongst team members that makes your product truly shine. So I feel like it's that is a main piece of building trust, like making yourself vulnerable in front of your team members, giving them the space to talk about, hey, and being okay with saying, hey, I don't know about anything about this. Can you tell me can you tell me how to do this? Can you, and I guess just being okay with not knowing, it's something that I feel like it's just, it's a really great way for building trust. In fact, it's really interesting that you asked this question, because I'm very actively listening into about how to have better conversations with people, and how to make it more rewarding, and how to build trust and influence people and get influenced. Like, I guess, like, I've been, like, very actively been very interested in that kind of. And Sam, like, I know you've done this social psychology, something you've done, right? Like, I don't know which one, but, like, I do feel like it's just that I think conversations are so deeply missing in our culture today, that and that's why trust. Like, we live in a very polarized society these days, and I feel like just being able to talk to one another, and that trust can be built only with conversations, in my opinion. And I think, like, and because we live behind the Steam's windows, we have less of that these days. And I feel like it's more important than ever to be able to work on those skills in order to build that trust and create products that are amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it better, Anuja. It's the communication is key. We're fortunate at Microsoft to have growth mindset is a big part of our culture. And so we're encouraged to say, I don't know, let me figure it out. Like, let's work on this. There's something I need to learn. And I do think that goes a long way toward building trust as well, being able, not being a know-it-all when you don't really know. I think being flexible too, and saying, okay, what does the team need right now? I will be there to provide it, even if it's not what I consider to be like a primary part of my role. I talked about that earlier, but just the flexibility to jump in and help where you're needed. I think that builds trust as well, and people will turn to you and appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, there's a book, Anuja, that I don't know if you've read it. It's called Super Communicators. It's a lot about what you're talking about. It's just this idea. It's by Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit. And it's about communicating with others and how to understand, like, what's the conversation about? What kind of conversation are we having? And that helps me understand the other person's side, helps me understand how I need to react. There's, like, reciprocity. It talks about a lot of different ways to build trust. And you'd probably like it. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, for sure. I'll look it up.
That's great. Now, you guys kind of already answered my next question, which is kind of about, like, the specific, like, strategies or techniques that you use to kind of foster that trust. And it sounds like being your genuine, authentic self, kind of embracing the learning mindset, and being, like, transparent in your communication. I think all resonates a lot. But do you have anything else to add to that?
I would add a little bit something more to it, and especially for early in career folks. Like, I like to say that something that I've heard from my mentor as well is, like, raise your hands, raise your hand for opportunities, even if you don't know how to do it. Like, just raise your hand if you have the capacity to do it. And, something that I heard also from a mentor, and something to the effect, I might be misquoting her, but, like, say no to good so you can say yes to the great. So, like, I would say that also knowing what your own capacity is, and and something I'm actively working on, honestly. Like, I am not very good at this. I'm just gonna be very vocal about that, but I am trying to work on this by really knowing where I can say no, and where I want to raise hands, and raising hand and helping out, as Sam pointed out, is, like, a huge way to build trust and make those connections. I would definitely want to say that. And I think it's just, again, the flip side of that coin is knowing your own capacity, and then communicating that very clearly to your team, not saying, hey, I'm going to do this, and then not end up delivering. I think that's something which sometimes when we start to take on too many things, then, it's really hard to say no to stuff and to communicate very clearly what your capacity is. So these are the two things very tactical strategies that I can recommend.
Yeah, I'm totally with that. I think a lot of us struggle saying yes to a lot of things, and then having too much on our plate to be able to deliver it all. So something I'm working on too, and have been for a long time. I think the thing that helps me there is just trying to make sure what I'm working on aligns and like triangulate on the best kind of opportunities. Like I'm interested in accessible technology. So if a project that comes my way and it's aligned with business goals and I have time, and even better if it's either like with people I like to work with, or if it's something that I can take some of the observations and bring back to my own product, like so much the better. But just the more pieces you can have around that deliver value or align with what you want to do, those are the things to say yes to.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. Definitely gonna try to employ a lot of those strategies. Yeah, that brings us to our lightning round questions. So take as much time as you'd like to answer these, but that's kind of like speed round, one after another. So the first question is one of your favorite books that you would recommend others to read.
I think I would stick with Super Communicators. I'm in the middle of it now. My research team has a book club, and so we chose that as our book, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So highly recommend.
So I have to confess that I've not been reading too much lately. It's between my 7-year-old and my baby. It's just really hard to find the time to read. But I am listening to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, and I'm a podcast girl. So like I listen to, I highly recommend The Hidden Brain. I'm sure everybody knows about that, but The Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam. It's my go-to podcast if I want to feel inspired or anything. And right now they're running a U 2.0 series, which is all about, in fact, the latest one they have is all about interactions and how to make those rewarding with people.
Great books.
Yeah, I like Hidden Brain. That's a good one.
Yeah.
It's been around a long time.
Yeah, I love it. I've been listening to it for like years now.
What's a show or movie that you've fallen in love with recently?
I have to say, I recently, like just 2 weeks ago, I flew. I was flying to Mexico, and on the way, I finally got around to watching Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I loved it. It is such an amazing movie, so refreshing, and of course, it bagged a ton of Oscars. But like, I do think that it's a crazy, but it's an amazing movie. Like, great combination of humor and sci-fi and just so much depth also in the message. So I do feel like I highly recommend if you haven't watched it already.
I haven't watched it.
Go watch it.
I will. I will, because I'm going to take a page out of your book, Anuja, and pivot and say I haven't actually seen anything lately. I watch plenty of TV, but I haven't seen anything that I'm like in love with right now. So I'd go to a podcast too here. So I really, really enjoy the Hard Fork podcast. It is by Kevin Roos, who is a tech reporter for the New York Times, and Casey Newton. He has a tech newsletter called Platformer, and I think they're just both really funny. They talk a lot about like the latest in AI. They talk a lot about tech, obviously a lot about like tech disruption, self-driving cars, just you name it. It ends up being a lot of fun. It comes out once a week. So I look forward to that one every week.
What's a piece of advice that you wish you received early in career?
Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Oh no, I got a great piece of advice from a studio lead in one of my former positions. And I was debating between two opportunities. I could either stay on the team that I was on and keep going, which I really enjoyed, or I could take a management position. And I was like hemming and hawing between them. And what he said is, look, careers are long. And that was so impactful to me because I think we get tied up with each decision, thinking each decision is really important and it's going to have a giant impact. And so you can tie yourself in knots over it, when in reality, like I'll be working for another 20, 30 years. So I've got lots of time to do all the things that I might not do now. And if I choose one path and not the other, then that doesn't mean I'm never, ever going to be able to choose that path that I didn't take. So it helped me put things in perspective really well. And I wish I had known that 10 years earlier.
What a powerful advice. I had to say, like, yeah, that's a great one. To me, something that it all relates, like everything, when you're in a certain phase in life, and when I'm learning about communication, especially, something that I'm hearing a lot is being curious and listen more and talk less. I think, as early in career, there's always this self-imposed, self-inflicted pressure of wanting to show the world that we know everything, and stuff like that. I mean, maybe it was just me, maybe it was some other folks as well, but like to me that was I was also in a culture where the more outspoken folks were rewarded. So I do feel that something that I wish I had this advice given to me early in career, because I think it applies both professionally as well as personal relationships.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Great, really powerful piece of advice. Awesome. Well, I've kept you guys here long enough. Last question is, where can people find you if they want to interact or connect?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Samantha Neufeld. It's Neufeld, and always happy to chat with people.
Yeah, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Anuja Singhal, just look me up. I guess I should be in there, and also on Teams. Always around to interact. And if you come towards Maple Valley, then I'm at home. Usually, typically.
Don't give out your address.
With my very large family of 2 kids and 3 feline babies.
Oh, I know. I see one of them cruising around.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for taking the time again. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. And I know you guys are pretty busy, so thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Thomas. It was really fun to reflect on everything, and look forward to chatting with anybody who wants to reach out.
Yeah. And also getting to know Sam more.
Yeah, I know. This was so fun.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And I'm glad to be able to facilitate this. So, yeah, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.